So we are moving on to week 3 of our course, and this one will concern data handling and visualization. And of course, because before we can do any data analysis in Matlab, we have to get the data imported from somewhere. So quite often we'll have an external file in various forms. That could be a text file, Excel file, CSV, or maybe Matlab data file. So you have to load or import that one first. So in this video, we will go through the basic commands which can be used for that, and then we will briefly have a look also at data export. So the easiest way to get data in is use the manual import, which you can find from Matlab's home menu, and it's called import data. So let's have a look where that can be found. We are now in the editor window, but when I go to home, import data is right there. So by clicking that, you can access your storage, where you can actually browse for the data you want to import anywhere. So for instance, whichever files are actually possible to be imported into Matlab will be visible as active. They can be different file types. You can have some files which are openable as text files, and that's why they are also active for import. But obviously Excel files will be available. And when I look around other folders, there are some more Excel files. For instance, also figure or pictures are possible to be imported, because some of you might be working with image processing, for instance, so such a picture will be imported in a matrix form into Matlab. Then I can see some Matlab data files. So these are the ones which can't be easily opened by any other programs, but they are the fastest to be operated on when it comes to working in Matlab. And there could be also some CSV files as well. So once you've decided what you want to import or where is the data that you want to work with, you just click on that and open. So what happens is that Matlab will open for us this import interface, where you can immediately see the contents of your data file, or at least preview of part of it. If it's a small one like here, you can see all of it. If it's a huge data file, you will just see initially the first rows and columns of it, and also the opening of this preview can take much more time if the data file is big. There are some couple of things. So for instance, you can mark the range that you're planning to import. What's the type that you want it to have? So normally it seems like the default these days is in table form, but you also can ask for numeric matrix. This one is more natural to work with. You can also have it as cell array, where Matlab will be able to import both the numeric values that are here, but also the column headers, because you might have a data file where the first row actually tells what's the content of the data, so each column has its own name. So using the cell array, you should be able to get both numeric and the textual content in. And then if it happens that your data has some values missing, so for instance in Excel case this could mean that there is an empty cell somewhere. So here is an option what Matlab should do with it, and the default again is that it would replace it by none, so not a number. We will talk about nuns a little bit later in this course, but for now this is what you should know, that in case there is a missing value or unimportable for any reason, then Matlab will replace it with not a number value. So when I click, let's say I don't want it as a table, I want it as a matrix, since that's the data type we are used to work with. So I choose import data. And when I close this interface, now you can see in our workspace there is a matrix called Xl data. So this was actually the name of my file, the Excel file. And it has values sized 13 by 5. So now if you want to see what is inside, here it is. And it seems like this Excel had some pre-formatted content around the actual numerical data. So that's why now we have all those not numbers. So how about we open it once again and try to make sure that we are picking the right range, because now we have actually marked a much bigger area. Once again, numeric matrix. Then I'll make sure I choose here just that range which actually contains some data. Import selection. Apparently, if you have imported something once from a given file, then Matlab doesn't automatically overwrite the previous import. So now it has created another variable which has the actual content. Let's say Xl data 1. So now we have the numerical values inside. It would have worked same way if you had text file. If it's a text file that you are trying to import, then it should be tab delimited, so which means that the values between different columns should be having a tabular space between. And then you can also import CSV files which are comma delimited. And then Matlab data files, there are the actual Matlab data forms, so it could contain matrices, it could contain cell array structures, and so on. So this is with the manual import. And another alternative is that you can use some ready commands for importing data. So once again, the most universal one is import data command. And let's see quickly how to use it. So that's the one which is more natural, where you want to have a code which does everything for you. You don't want to go through this manual import part. So let's type import data, and now how we actually access that file is that first of all you have to make sure it is actually located inside the folder where your Matlab's memory is, and then in the parentheses, because that's how if we have a function, which in this case is called import data, the possible arguments for that function have to be given in round parentheses. And then we are giving the name of the file, since name of the file is a piece of text, so that's why we have to insert it in those singular quote marks. And I will enter the name of the file. It was called Xl data, but you also have to add the actual extension. And especially when it comes to Excel files, you have to be aware whether you have the XLSX file, which is these days most common, or is it the old Excel? So is it just XLS? In case you know that you have an Excel file, and for instance, I'll type it like this, just with XLS, then I run my code, and it says unable to open files. So if you are sure you have an Excel file, which is called like that, then most likely you have used the wrong extension, because now when I run it, everything is okay. So the result of this import data command is that you actually get a structure. And that structure contains possibly text data, which is in your file, and the numerical data. And if you don't assign this import anywhere, now this is the difference between using manual import and the command, is that if you don't assign it anywhere, the data actually goes into our well-known variable ans. So I don't want it to be called ans because I can easily lose it. So I will call my data x. So now after running it again, my structure now will be called x. Now, as we have seen, when we work with structures, each structure can have multiple attributes, and those attributes can be accessed by typing first the structure name, which in our case is X, and then the name of that attribute. So now I can see in here Matlab tells me that there is attribute called data and text data. And here we can see that under data is the actual numerical content. So when I type like this, I can see that resulting matrix. So what I could do here is, for instance, create a variable called data and say x.data. So from now on, this data here is something completely different than the data, which is, at least by name, than the data that is an attribute of our structure. They are not confusing each other. So when I run this piece, then I am having an actual data variable which has that numeric content. Alternative import commands are load, for instance. This one doesn't work with Excel files, but it does work with text files and with Matlab data files. So now I can show you what this Matlab data file actually means. Whenever I have something in my workspace, which means that I do have variables which I've created or imported, I can save that content into a Matlab data file. And for that we use the command save. So if I now say save, and then I give a name of this file I want to create. So I will just call it my data. If I do it like this, Matlab will save for me everything that is in the workspace. So I press enter. Nothing happens here in the workspace, but you can see that in my working folder there appeared my data file with this .mat extension, which actually is now containing everything I had in my workspace. And how can I know that this is so? If I go into my script, and first I clear everything, so I clear the workspace memory, and then I type in here load. So I know that I have created this my data file and I want to load it. The advantage of using Matlab data files is that you don't have to type all those extensions. So if you just say load my data, it will bring back that content which we have seen before. And there it is. And in case you don't want to load everything, maybe I want to load only that numerical data matrix and not that whole structure, then I can, after the file name, which I asked Matlab to access, after just space, I point out which variable I want in. So now when I run this code again, Matlab will clear the workspace once again, and then it will open that data mat file and pick from it only the data variable. So once I run it, you can see only the data, or the matrix called data, is in there. Alternatively, for importing, we also have Xls Read Command and CSV Read, so you can immediately know that they are actually meant for first one for Excel files, typical Excel files, and second one for the CSV files, which means that they are comma delimited. And again, if you use it, you have to put the extension when you type the name. So if I say here Xls Read, and my data was called Excel data, and again you have to point the extension, so as XLSX, and I will assign it somewhere. Let's call it D now. So now what happened is that this D indeed contains just the numerical content of my Excel file, even though that file contained as well some text data. Okay, so now when we know how to get the data in, we have a quick look at exporting data, so how to save it out, how to get your results into an external file. So one I have actually already shown, and it was that save command, and that's the one which is natural to be used when you want to get your results into a Matlab data file. However, you can also export them into XLS format or CSV format. So all you need to do is to say, for instance, Xls Read, and then I create file name, let's say my Excel data, and I point out now which variable I want to place in that file. So after running this portion, I should get that file in here. There seem to be some, okay, it actually made it a CSV file. Sometimes when you work on MacBook, there seem to be some complications with this data export. But anyway, it has created a CSV file, which you can of course open in Excel as well. And all these commands we have seen could have some extra options. For instance, the Xls Read. You can, when calling the command, you can add extra options. For instance, if it's not the first sheet from which you're picking the data, you can point which one it is, and you can decide on the range of the data you're importing by giving this as an extra option. So if you want to learn more, the easiest is to go into help. So I will type in here Xls Read. Okay, and it's the first one that we are interested in. So here you can just scroll down to examples. This is the best way to learn. The examples of what are the extra options are available in here. So if you look at the beginning, you see if you just use Xls Read and give the file name, that's how you get the base content in. But then you can also point in the sheet, and you can point the range. So the example here was, for instance, like this, that you define file name, you point to the sheet. So you can either do it by pointing which in order it is, or I think you can also refer to its name, and then the range you give just the same way you would give it when you work in Excel. So for instance, here are the cells from B2 to C3, so it would take that rectangular portion from the file. And then you just say that your data becomes Xls Read from that particular file, particular sheet, and particular range that you're interested in. Alternatively, you can decide on the range without pointing to the rows, for instance. So here you see how to do it, to pick just particular range of columns or just one column. In that case, for the range, you just set, you give the column names and not the row numbers. So that's it. And I would think that when you work on some project the most, you will probably start with importing a CSV file. And then as you work in Matlab, I would suggest that since quite often you will have to run specific code or specific import many times. So what I recommend is that you load it once from CSV and then save it as Matlab data file. And the reason is that importing from Excel always takes quite a bit of time. And once you save it once as data, Matlab data file, then importing it again as Matlab data file will be much faster. Let me give you an example. I have this one file which is pretty big. It has lots of columns and tens of thousands of rows of data. This one, you see, it's 5.4 megabytes. It even takes time in Excel to open it. So you see there is the content. So now if you want to do the import, and for instance you want to use Xls Read for that, so what you should do is say like this. Maybe let's call this data, or I will use maybe import data, because then I can have the headers for the columns. With such a big data file, it's actually practical to have that in. So import data, and the file was called big data 1 xlsx. I will comment the rest here. So now let's look how long it takes now when I run it. Oh yes, that file is located somewhere else, so I will have to shift it. Alright, so let's try again. I run, and now you see it's busy. It remains busy, so it can take even up to some few minutes if you have really a huge data file. But it takes time. You could even go have a coffee, come back, and it might still be loading. But let's wait through till the end so that you actually see how much in reality it takes. Yes, so it finished now. So it has been at least good over 10 seconds or more. And as I said, now you see our numerical data has 41,000 rows, but these days you can easily have millions. So you shouldn't rely on loading or importing your data every time from the Excel file if you need to do some bigger analysis on it. So what I will do now is save it. I also call it big data, like this, which means that Matlab will save it as Matlab data file. The saving takes fraction of a second, and now what I will do is clear the memory and load that big data. Now you see the big data is there as a Matlab data file. So I'll replace my save with load and run. And you see it ran in no time. It's in there within half a second or less. So this is why, remember, if you have big data file outside Matlab, like Excel file, CSV, or text file, load it once, save it as Matlab data file. And then every time you run your work, make sure you're running on that Matlab data file, and only once you've done whatever analysis, model fitting, prediction, you have your results, then you can comfortably export them also to Excel file or a CSV file for the next person to take over and do whatever is needed with them.